Imagine that you could take your brain, the thoughts in your head, and actually put them on the screen and connect them up.
Welcome, friends, to a podcast with interesting people. I'm Adrian Sinclair, and this is the Adrian Sinclair Show, and I am very excited to have Harlan Hugh, the founder of TheBrain.com, today on the show. He created this software called TheBrain, which is a mind mapping software unlike any other out there, and it's been around for 20 plus years, and a lot of companies are using it, and we'll learn more from him. How did he develop it? Why? What was his inspiration? In this modern era of information, overload, how we stitch things together, how we build our own mind maps to form opinions or ideas or collect knowledge and organize it and make it useful to us. We're swimming in this sea of information. We often get lost at connecting things together. We lose data. It's all over the place. Yes, there are some tools out there like wikis which allow us to kind of put things together and interlink in a sort of internet page-like format. But this software with mind mapping is really offering a different kind of perspective of how you can organize and link data, information, how you can work that data, how you can have that information work for you, help you make those critical associations, brainstorming, and figuring out how things kind of fit together and maybe have some revelations or some ideas that pop out of it. So we'll talk to Harlan Hugh today about that, and very excited to introduce you guys to him. So without further ado, here we are. Harlan, thank you for being on the show. This is a pleasure and honor of having you on the show. Long time in the making to align all of our schedules. You are a busy, successful person. So thank you for being on the show, man.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So this is, in this show, as I told you, we're doing long format, so we have some space to kind of to explore, and I want to kind of lead in with just kind of your description. I gave it my perspective of how I think of the brain, but I would love to hear like your perspective of like how you think of the application that you develop, the brain, and how do you describe it to those who like you meet for the first time and they never heard of it, and you're like, hey, it's like this thing that allows you to do this thing and connect things, and like, so how do you do that? How do you describe the brain?
Right. Well, I mean, the brain is really a way of organizing information the same way that you think about it. The idea for the software came about because when I was originally kind of thinking about what to do with my life, essentially,
right.
I had I'd been working on computers for a very long time, and I was always so excited about how they worked and what the potential was for them. But most of the people that I knew just kind of thought of them as like a fancy typewriter. This is all kind of pre-internet, and I thought, well, the reason why they think about it that way is because that's how it's presented, right? The metaphor for computing is a computer desktop, right? And there's a trash can, files and folders, and all these things that are relatively boring. And I thought, well, what if we just change that metaphor and say the brain is a way of using your computer just like you think in your head.
Right.
And so when I describe it to people, I say, well, imagine that you could take your brain, the thoughts in your head, and actually put them on the screen and connect them up. And each piece of information on the screen represents one of the thoughts in your head. And in addition to just having kind of like basic information about it, you can also attach web pages and files and pictures and all kinds of data into there. So It's like a digital home for all your information that's networked in the same way you think about it. When
you started building it, I'm sure you had an idea how that would turn out. I mean, you've been doing this for 20 plus years now. How did it turn out in comparison to like that initial concept? If you can roll back the time clock, it's like, remember the day when I thought about it, and then this is how I envisioned it. How did it actually turn out to be after all these years?
Well, I mean, I think there's two major differences to how kind of the world is today versus when I first conceived of the idea. One is that there's the internet. I started working on this in the early 90s, and I'd never heard of the internet when I first started working on it. And personal computing really was personal. Like,
right.
You had a machine that sat on your desk.
You and your computer.
It wasn't connected to anything. Yeah, it was just you. It was literally, one isolated little world. And so I thought, well, that world should mimic what's in your head, and it's like a way of putting your head into that, right? Whereas today, computers are a lot more about communication and sharing of information, right? So that aspect of it is kind of radically changed. And then, of course, with the advent of the iPhone and everything going to mobile, that's just made things, all that much more pervasive in terms of information and all the things that you need to manage and how close you are to your phone and how accessible everything is, right? So in a way, both of those things have made the brain much more powerful in that now you can literally have access to it anytime, any place, and it can connect up to anything else in the world, right? So it's like a way of really connecting your mind to the rest of the world, right? Organizing the information that you create was kind of the original vision, where everything that you're putting in it is things that you're creating, right? Computers weren't so much a device for consumption as they were for creation and organization. Whereas today, most of the interaction most people have with computers is like interacting with news or watching movies or, seeing pictures from friends, all that kind of stuff, right? So now the brain is not just about organizing the information that you create, but also kind of rearranging the information in the world to match your thinking.
And I think that's one of the very powerful elements of the brain, which is it allows you to mimic how you think, which is what you said, which is creating those structures, because we think in terms of associations, right? Like, how many times have one thought in your brain spawned like a cascading effect of you thinking like, how did I started thinking about that? Like I was thinking about like, I don't know, marshmallows, and now I'm on to like spaceships or something. And it's interesting how you kind of traverse that in your brain, right? You're like, this made me think about that. That made me think about that. And here I am over here. And then you make some kind of, hopefully you make some kind of educated, maybe hopefully it came out, you have some kind of a insight out of that journey, right? So that is
absolutely.
I think that's what's so appealing about the brain as the software. When we typically think of organizing data, we think in kind of this tree type of structure, right? Everybody organizes like a filing cabinet, and in fact, when you go back in time. Because I think you might be a little bit younger than I am, but we both remember probably Apple II and like the original the little folders and everything, and then Windows came out, and Windows 3.1 and you had like these folders and this tree structure, and you're like, wow, okay, this is how I can organize, and it makes that direct parallel to like how we file things in file cabinets, right? You open up this, it has a bunch of little folders in it, and then there's stuff inside of each one of them, but even though they may be somehow related on different plane, this is sitting in this bucket, this is sitting in this bucket, and so there's no connection between that. And I think the first thing I remember, the brain, back when you guys were on like Tech TV and talking about it and kind of introducing the world to it, and I was like, wow, this is like so amazing how you can connect seemingly separate file folders together. You can like, hey, this can be connected also to this, but also to this. And your typical kind of file structure does not allow that. It's either in this branch of the tree or this branch of the tree. And then that introduces like you have duplicates because you got this file here and so on and so forth. That's why even from there back then, I thought it was just so revolutionary that you did something like that. But I think it's even more than that. It's the visual aspect. A lot of people are visual in terms of like how they ingest data, how they assimilate data, and that's where that's the other power of the brain, which allows you to kind of shape how these things are laid out and see it from like this bird's eye view almost, where you can kind of trace different types of connections and then figure out like why are they meaningful to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the approach is really kind of almost diametrically opposed to the file folder approach. When they tried to figure out, well, how do we organize information on the computer? Um, you know, they did a great job because it was the first time it was ever done, but it was really kind of a failure of imagination, right?
Right.
They thought, well, this is how we do it in the real world. Why not do it the same way, right? Yeah. And really, the way we organize information in the real world and in files and folders is by separating information. You're creating different buckets and putting things into those buckets, right?
Right.
And the act of separating things is really not the right way to organize information. The way that we organize information in our heads is by connecting things, right? And those connections form structures as opposed to kind of groupings of separated things. Even in the modern day operating system, when you create an alias or a shortcut, depending on your flavor of OS, you're connecting things in a way, but in an extremely limited way. You're really saying, well, here's a virtual copy of this piece of data that I'm going to put over here, right? But even when you do that, you're not creating a connection between the two places that you're putting the original and the alias. So, the networked concept is really something that's taken off in terms of the World Wide Web, obviously, and social networks, things like that. But even today, the way most people organize the stuff that they access on a daily basis is still based on separating information rather than connecting it. And I think the brain is probably the most practical way to actually kind of move forward and organize information via a network which matches the way you think.
I am just blown away that, in a way, maybe you rejected offers. I don't know, but I will tell you honestly. I thought that when you guys were on Tech TV many years ago, I was like, this is going to be like in the next version of Windows. Like literally, Microsoft is going to come in, buy you guys. This is how the next operating system is going to look like. And to my dismay, we're stuck in this still tree folder structure with the best thing, as you said, is like a link or an alias to kind of point you to another place where a file lives. I mean, it's just amazing. Yeah. It's mind-boggling that this is not integrated to operating systems. Do you have a theory? Why is that so?
Well, I guess you asked about kind of what the surprises were when we started doing this thing, and one of the things that I kind of expected actually was that somebody would copy us, or Apple or Microsoft or somebody would like kind of bake this into the operating system. And on the one hand, it's great that hasn't happened.
Right. That's another but mind-blowing thing. Like, nobody's like there's mind mapping programs out there, software that create these static kind of just almost like Visio-like diagrams where you kind of see things, but nothing as dynamic as how the brain is.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one reason why nobody else has done what we've done, as an independent company, not one of the giants, right, is that it's actually very difficult to do. There's a lot of kind of heavy lifting that has to be done to make it all work, even though it seems relatively straightforward when you just glance at the surface. But in terms of why Microsoft or Apple or somebody like that hasn't done this, I think that the part that I really underestimated when I was starting out was that it's really hard to change the way people behave. Yeah. And once they're used to doing things one way, it's for a lot of people, it's just like, that's not happening. So,
that is true.
The software is I think it's easy to use, but compared to a lot of other things, it's relatively complicated. So it really is kind of a self-selecting group of people that get really enthusiastic about it. But when somebody does, get into it, they kind of become lifelong converts. Yeah. So, that's the great thing, but it's also, a bit of a weakness in that, the software is not really for everybody, but it's for people who really cherish their information and who like to think deeply about it and understand it. And who care about their information. One of the slogans that we have been using for a while now is software for thinkers. And that's not to say that if you don't use the software, you're not a thinker, but it's that people that are really into the software, they're all people who are excited about and enthusiastic about thinking.
Right.
And that's kind of like the key part of their being, if you will.
Right. I see what you're saying. See, I'm even using the language of visual language. I see what you're saying, because
yes,
it is that. It is, even like when Microsoft switched from like Windows 3.1, networked one into like Windows 95, where like the menuing system changed, and it was like all this brouhaha, like, well, you're just kind of blowing up like the way I'm thinking about everything. And then, those progressions to a newer operating system where they are slowly kind of adding new things into it. They slowly like encroach versus, oh, well, we're going to do things totally differently. And so I see what you're saying in a sense of that it might have been too big of a chasm for people to breach in terms of like this kind of way of thinking, this old style way of file cabinet type of structure, tree structure, to this kind of, this is how the web works as well, because like everything is sort of interconnected on the web. But yet we don't see that, right? Because we still have this kind of bucketized type of, you go to a website and what do? You click on the menu and what does it look like? Clink, 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 right? Like these kind of, just a list, like a file list in a folder. So I see that perspective, but I still wish that, they gave it at least as an option, so that over time, younger generations coming into this would assume that as the way of thinking forward. And then within those last 20 years, we would have had new, netizens on the internet who would be using it as a native kind of interface. So I don't know.
Well, I mean, one of the benefits of it being independent is that now you can actually have the same interface in effect on your phone, on your Windows machine, on your Mac machine. Like, it's all the same, right?
Yeah.
Instead of the kind of operating system or the folders that you have on your desktop, instead of that being your home, now you have a home that's independent and across all those different platforms.
Yeah. So tell me more about as you were building the software and growing it to where it's at right now. How have you changed as a person in terms of like business person and growing this? From the inception of the concept and wrapping it into like a business, because a lot of Fortune 100 companies are using this software. In fact, I just finished doing a podcast with a radio talk show host who used to work for CNN and Fox, and he said that they were using your software to help them kind of understand and build the knowledge of like everything that they were consuming as information and kind of trying to paint a picture. So as you were over the decades, literally we can say that, over decades of development of the software, how has the software in turn shaped you? Because you shaped it. How has it shaped you? How are you using it?
Well, I mean, for most of my adult life, I've been using TheBrain. I created the first prototype when I was like 17, maybe something like that.
Wow.
The version that I'm using now, like the brain that I'm using now, I started in 1996, I think. So I have that one brain that's been around with me for a very long time now. So I almost can't quite remember not ever being able to use it. So I just kind of take it for granted now. So I think that's one thing. Yeah. But in terms of how I've changed, I mean, I think I was 19 years old when I moved to Los Angeles to start this company. Mm-hmm. And, hopefully I've changed it a little, mostly for the better. I mean, when I first started out, I was, a little bit overly optimistic, as I think everyone is when they start a business. Yeah. Otherwise you wouldn't do it.
That's right. It's like, I'm giving you the best thing ever. How come you're not seeing this?
Yes.
But you've been coding since you've been coding since you were 6-year-old. So, the beauty of being a programmer is that you are once you sort of master the programming language, you literally, your imagination is the sky's the limit, right? It's, if you can create it in your brain, it gives you that unique place of being a creator and you can literally do it in your garage, in your bedroom, in your office, anywhere. You can literally conceive it and build it. And I think that's such an empowering thing because, I mean, given time,
Absolutely,
of course.
Yeah.
And so that gives you a sense of empowerment that you can. And given that you have created this from the inception in like 1996 and built it out, and now here we are in 2020. So this software is going to be literally almost a quarter of a century old soon, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that a little bit later because I have a question about that. That relationship of you building the software and using the software and how you change it, and then how it changes you because you get insights from like putting that knowledge into the software that you're developing, and then that gives you insights, and then like, wow, okay, I never thought about that. So it's almost like Inception in a way, where you create something that you use that then changes you, and then that cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I use the software to develop the software now. So that's
have you had like a Matrix moment, like where you were like, "Whoa,"
Well, one of the things that I use the software for is to document new ideas I have. And every time I have a really good idea, I go to a place in my brain. It's really good ideas. Yeah. I put it in there, and then I'll connect it up to whatever else it's related to, and all that. But the other day, I was in there and I was like, "Oh, I've got this great idea," and so I go into my brain and I start writing it down. And I'm like, "Oh, this is so great! I'm so smart. I can't believe how great this is." But I'm a little self-congratulatory whenever I think I've got a good idea, which usually turns out to be not as good as it originally was. But at any rate, that's kind of an aside. Once I wrote it all down, I was like, "Oh man, this is so awesome! I should look at what else I have written down in here." And I look right next to the thought I just created. There's another thought right here.
And it's that idea?
It says the exact same idea. And I go over in there and I read it and I'm like, hey, I'm like consistent at least. I'm the same idea twice.
Double genius. Extra points.
Yes.
That's exactly what happened to me too. And it's amazing how I think that's where the brain, I think, is so cool, because we are swimming in this pool of information, and a lot of times we are so distracted, and we think of something, we maybe write down a note somewhere, it's in a notepad, then there's another one in a WordPad, then it's in some, then we send ourselves an email, then it's living here and here and here and all over the place, and then you forget about that idea. The brain is kind of like that repository that allows you to kind of retrace. So even if we'll talk a little bit about Jerry Michalski's brain, which is like this massive construct where he puts everything in. Yeah. And I definitely want to invite him on the show and talk about his journey about that as well. But it's like you literally are building these roads, and sometimes one thing leads to another and leads to another, and you arrive at the same place. So even if you genuinely forget it, just like in your case, you forgot about an idea that you already had, likelihood is that through brain you can kind of find it, and it's an amazing play. You probably chuckled at yourself. You're like, oh man, I already had that idea.
Yeah, on the one hand, it's great. The brain works. The software reminded me of something I had already done. On the other hand, I was like, oh man, my real brain is like deteriorating.
I know. I know. And I think that's how I kind of think of it in terms of building it out. So it's kind of like my go-to place. And I got to tell you, the biggest obstacle that I had was because I was still in that mentality of file cabinet, kind of grouping things in my brain so that I could retrace them. I couldn't let go in terms of creating something that seemingly was out of place in terms of my other structure, that artificial structure of the tree kind of file cabinet idea. Right. And it takes time for you to kind of let go and trust that, well, first of all, it has great search capability inside of it, so you can kind of just search. But even if you would retrace your thinking, likelihood is that you're going to end up you're going to bounce on that thought that you wrote down. Maybe unless you're like Jerry, who has 700 thoughts, 700,000 nodes in his brain and keep on growing. But it is
he's at 400,000 right now.
400,000 thoughts and 700 something I guess nodes or connections maybe.
Yeah, it might be links. Yeah, probably
it might be the links. Yeah. So the brain's been around for over 22 years, 23, soon to be quarter of a century. What do you think it makes it so successful? I mean, you've had huge companies using it. And what are your thoughts on why is it still around, even though it's not sort of like the mainstream that everybody knows about the brain, and yet you guys are successful? What do you think makes it successful?
Well, I mean, it's really quite a unique piece of software. I mean, I think that's the one thing it has going for it, aside from the obvious benefits of the software once you're into it. But there's other software that's mind mapping software, but we say mind mapping software just so people have some idea of what the software is like.
Right.
But in reality, I never even knew what mind mapping was when I first created the software. It was only after I started showing it to people, they were like, "Oh, have you ever seen mind mapping?" And I was like, maybe I should check that out.
Yeah.
But that's why it's so different, because it was never that to begin with.
Right.
I mean, if we were just like another mind mapping piece of software, I probably would have said, okay, well, I've done enough of this already, and maybe we wouldn't be around. But
right.
But we're quite different than that, and as a result, we have a lot of really dedicated users who really love the software,
mm-hmm.
and a lot of people that love the software working at the company. So that's kind of the key building block, I guess, and then the fact that the software is really the only way that you can organize your information in a networked fashion. Like, there's really no other way to do it. I mean, you can do it with maybe text, or maybe one type of content. But if you actually want to pull everything together, whether it's files or web pages or images or notes or contacts, and you want it to work across multiple platforms, like, this is it.
Yeah, so pretty much monopoly in a sense, but yet like undiscovered by a lot of people out there. And it has, you're absolutely right, it has a, it does have very unique set of attributes, because there's really, like you said, no other way of doing it. I have some questions for you a little bit later, because I have something that I'm sure you guys already thought of a million times. But I wanted to ask you, what are some of the weirdest, coolest, most surprising ways that you've seen people and organizations using the software, the brain? You had some high-profile thinkers that use the brain. Ray Kurzweil, the inventor and futurist, Singularity Now. David Allen from the Getting Things Done book series. James Burke, world-renowned historian and author. Big thinkers, genius-level people. How have you had a chance, speaking with them or talking to them or interacting with them, and just out of, maybe curiosity, just to find out, like, how are they using it? Any differently, or just like everybody else?
Well, one thing about the brain is everyone uses it a little differently. So, I mean, you could imagine kind of what they do with it, but, I've spoken with all of those people on several occasions. Ray Kurzweil is maybe the one that's the most of a mystery to me. We only got to talk to him a couple times, but he set it up to kind of organize all the things that he cares about and all the things that he wants the world to know about and to share his thinking on. So he was kind of using it more as a presentation, organization front end, so to speak. Obviously he's got a lot of interesting topics in there. But I was quite flattered that he wanted to talk to us and use our software. So that was a nice experience.
Mm-hmm.
David Allen, he's a really, really great guy. He's been a friend of the company for quite some time. And I didn't actually know anything about David Allen when I first heard that he was using the brain, and people were all excited about it. But then I started, reading his book, and I picked up his book, and I was like, oh, he's kind of talking about the brain right here.
yeah, because he's got a very specific way of organizing data, right? And a very specific, modality. And so I was kind of curious, how is he using, the brain?
Yeah, I think if he was a software engineer, he might have built the brain. But in his one of his quotes is, "Your head is for having ideas, not holding them." Right. And he always talks about kind of getting things out of your head and clearing the slate.
Right.
But obviously, you don't really want to clear it. You want to have it stored somewhere, right? I think he called it a trusted system. So, for me and for a lot of our users, that's what the brain is. It's very analogous to David Allen's whole kind of philosophy and way of thinking.
Right.
His methodology is a great fit with the brain. So, it's always nice to see somebody like that, really getting enthusiastic about the brain and being an actual user. We don't pay him or anything like that. And he's got a substantial brain with a lot of cool stuff in it. I
also love how the brain is just so it just opens up to a lot of puns. I have it in my brain. I got my brain in my computer. I'm sure you had a lot of fun with that as well. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yes. That's okay. So yeah, James Burke, he's an interesting guy also. He's very, very friendly and personable, as you would expect. There's Siri. Anyway,
wanting to butt in?
Wanting to butt in. Okay. Anyway, so James Burke, he's actually using the brain in a exactly as you'd expect him to, right? If you know anything about James Burke, you know that kind of his approach is all about making connections between seemingly disparate events in history and people and inventions and so forth. And when you watch one of his documentaries or read one of his books, he'll take you on a journey from one thing that happened 100 years ago to something that's happening today, and all the events in between and interdependencies and so forth. And his brain is actually all those connections, right? So when you look at his brain, you click on something like computers, for example, and you'll see all the connections that led to computers, the development of chips and memory and all these things, and the people and so forth. And it's all in his brain. Right. So it's really kind of his main repository for all that information. Yeah. And he's funny too, because he's been using the software for quite a long time, and every time we make a little change, he's like, "Oh, maybe you could make it go back the way it was." But
James, you got to grow your brain.
we do make special changes at his request, because he's been so great for us. But in terms of other kind of uses of the software, things that have been kind of really exciting for us. One that I'd like to talk about is there's some people that have kind of had medical problems, right? Where their actual physical brain is not functioning entirely correctly, and they can't make new memories. And we've had a few users that are actually using the brain to help kind of adjust for that.
Wow.
And I was just like so taken by that application of the software. It was just like, wow, I can't believe that we're actually able to help. It's very rewarding to see that kind of a real personal, intimate, almost dependence on the software. Right. It really makes you think, what you're doing really matters. So that was a very, very poignant use of the software.
Right. I mean, there must have been a very special day when you've learned of that. When you've learned that it's being used in such an unexpected way, because pretty sure that when you were designing it, you were like, okay, here's the utility that you see in sort of like every day and how everybody can use it, how you can use it, right? But then you're like, wow, I never considered that someone with like a brain, damaged brain can utilize this external thing to supplement their biological brain. I mean, we're talking like almost like a pseudo cyborg in a way, and and it's helpful to someone. So that's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, have you ever seen the movie Momentum?
Yeah.
Or Memento.
Memento, yeah. When he was using pictures to kind of remind himself, like, Yeah, and
he puts tattoos all over his body to remember what happened.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's kind of like that, but digital.
But digital, yeah. So, no ink involved. Yeah. And so you mentioned some of the ways that you use the brain, and any other sort of like day-to-day things that you use it. Other than what you've mentioned, like in kind of like software development, in terms of like, anything else. I guess what I'm fishing for is like if there's anything particular that you do that's kind of different than you've seen anybody else do, how you use the brain.
My use of the software is, I mean, I use it a lot, obviously, I'm very familiar with all the features and functions and so forth, of course, but my actual use of the software is not nearly as exciting as some of the other applications that I've seen people use it for. But it really is my life. I mean, if I ever lost my digital brain, I would be, I would be reset. So, but I've got a list of goals, things I want to accomplish. I've got a list of things that I'm working on right now. I've got, all the people that I know, all the types of things that you would expect from a person that's using the brain for all their stuff, really.
Right.
But in terms of sort of unique cases, mine's not the best. The best. Mine's maybe typical. Typical, which is good though, because it allows me to relate to our users.
Right. So I'm going to quote you. You said, "Your screen should not look like a bunch of pretty buttons that you use to order your computer from one task to the next. Instead, it should be a dynamic representation and experience of everything that's important to you." So with that in mind, and with what we talked about, big operating companies, Microsoft and or like open source, Linux and so on, how do you see how do you envision the next generation user interfaces will look like? What is stopping us from taking it to that next level? I think I know you mentioned that the transition for people and how they think about things and interactions with computers is one of the biggest hurdles. But do you think we're going to be stuck with this interface, what Microsoft offers forever, because no one will leap to that, do that quantum leap where they like, let's just rethink this and do this, totally differently? What do you think is stopping us?
Yeah, well, I mean, the biggest reset we've had, I think, is the advent of the iPhone, and most people never see files and folders in their iPhone, even though they're in there somewhere. Right. And Apple did introduce a Files app, but that was kind of a paradigm shift in terms of how we interact with computers. I think that there will be another one. I just don't know when it's going to be. Right now, we're trying to adapt our software to be more and more invisible.
Right.
As a visualization software, that kind of seems counterintuitive, but I believe that the user interface is really like it's like the frame around a picture, right? You don't care about the frame; you care about the content, right? And if you're looking at the frame, then it's not doing its job, right? The user interface is the same thing. Ultimately, you want the user interface to disappear and only see your content and your stuff, right?
Right.
So in terms of the brain, the visualization shows the connections and relationships between your information. But the object is for that all to be about you and not about the software and how the software works and all those things. So, we're really making an effort to try and hide those things and make them more and more transparent. We've got some very exciting things coming in the future, but I can't really talk about those, of course.
Well, a quarter century is soon upon you with the brain in terms of its existence. And one of the things, since our real brain was such a huge inspiration for you building this out. And for those of you who are watching this, we're going to put some graphics into this to showcase how the brain looks, so you can kind of follow along in terms of what we're describing over here. But right now, it is a, you're still dealing with a monitor and this kind of web of connections and nodes and thoughts, as they are called in the brain. And since the brain was inspired by the real brain, which is in 3D, my thought, and it was many, many years ago, and I know this is a humongous effort to do, even with what you guys developed over 2 decades, is just a tremendous accomplishment to kind of make this work and make it useful. Brain 3D. I mean, you got to share a secret. You got to share a secret. Are we going to look in Brain 3D? We have. Is it going to be Brain VR? I mean, we're VR it's still kind of at its inception, but it went through the kind of baby steps. Now it's kind of proliferating more and more. It's still not there. It's still not what it ought to be in everybody's room. We're still not that Ready Player One phase. But look, Facebook bought Oculus for over $3 billion back in the day. Huge investment. They thought about it, how huge it's going to be. And to me, thinking about taking the brain to the next level, no pun intended, the next dimension, I should say, is kind of like being immersed in that data. Now, I absolutely agree that this would be such a mind-blowing experience, because now having all these nodes and everything around you would be, might be so overwhelming to some people. But really, this is like, holodeck on Star Trek, Minority Report stuff flying around you type of deal, where you move things. And is this where we're heading?
Not anytime soon.
Okay. But you have considered it.
Well, I mean, we've built a 3D brain. It wasn't. I mean, it was interesting. I mean, it looked cool, but it's very hard to interact with, right? The problem with 3D is that right now, all of our tools are 2D, right? Your mouse is 2D, your screen is 2D, your touch screen is 2D. Like, there's no 3D.
There's no 3D,
right?
Yeah.
If we had VR, and it wasn't just something that you did for 20 minutes at a time or an hour at a time, if you're really into it, then maybe we would be building interfaces for that. But until somebody releases something totally revolutionary that makes people sit in 3D all day long, I don't think we're in for a change, right? The fact is that it's comfortable to sit in front of a screen and look at the screen, and then have the rest of the stuff in the real world, right? Yeah. If I could put on a pair of glasses that would put my thoughts all around me and not weigh 5 pounds, and cut me off from the rest of the world, then that would be great. But unfortunately, we're not there today. Yeah. I mean, it's something that would make a great movie scene. And when you watch Iron Man and he's got his thing on and he's looking around and seeing all this cool stuff, it looks great. Yeah. But it's not too practical, unfortunately. Right.
Yeah. No, I agree that, and I love VR. I have Vive and I have Oculus, and I really dabble in that space because I love using it. There's a software out there, I think it's actually Google Brush, or Tilt Brush is called, which allows you to paint in 3D. And, I got a 5-year-old daughter, and it was so amazing because now you can kind of connect it to the TV, so you can watch what the person inside of the VR is doing. It was just so amazing to see such a young mind kind of quickly figuring out that, even though she's used to drawing on a 2D surface and kind of this is what represents a house, a box and a triangle on top with some windows. Yeah. It was amazing to see how quickly she got into the 3D aspect of it. Like now suddenly like she drew a box, but now she kind of walked around it like, oh, wait a second, it needs that line over here and line over here. And then suddenly this becomes a 3D structure without any kind of training, without any kind of like, here's honey, how you do things. It was
awesome.
just so kind of natural. And so I feel that, next generations will be, as the VR technology gets better and better. And I totally hear what you're saying. The interaction of like touching things, moving things, because that's where you have like the pointer of the mouse where you can easily kind of click on things and make things happen on your 2D screen right now. In 3D, like, having that fidelity of like I'm grabbing this thought and not the one that's directly behind it but very close is where like that could like so easily break down. But I'm still hopeful that one day I will wake up and when Brain 20 comes out is going to be that 2D 3D button, which is like don your goggles and boom, you're inside of your brain.
One of the things that's kept me going is that I really do love developing software, and graphic software is like kind of my favorite thing to do. Maybe that's why TheBrain looks the way it does.
Right.
I would love to be able to just like spend all my time working on a 3D version of TheBrain. It would be so much fun, and I really hope that one day I'm able to do it. But another aspect of VR that really needs to improve for it to be to move beyond kind of an entertainment value is we need to be able to read text.
Yeah, resolution,
and,
for sure.
It's not good right now.
Not quite there. Yeah. You have to get close to things.
You really have to get close to them, and I have the Oculus. What's it called? Quest. Yeah, and there's a web browser in there, but of course the web browser, it's a simulation of a 2D screen.
And it's massive. For you to read anything, you have to. It has to be really blown up into a big thing where you have to get close to it to really like resolve, especially like smaller text. So that's absolutely
right.
But I think it's going to get better, just like everything else. 4K is going to come out. 8K is going to come out. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, one day we'll look back at this conversation and laugh because we thought it was going to be hard to get text to read in VR, but we are where we are today. I hope that the things change quickly, and I get a good reason to start working on the VR brain.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of other technologies that are getting up to kind of speed, which are making VR more usable. Whether it's haptic gloves, things that will allow you to actually touch and feel things, another level, and again, no pun intended, but like another dimension for like interaction that would be possible in the brain, where you could feel literally through the data as it's represented in this three-dimensional space. You literally could go through the data and touch those nodes, those thoughts, and kind of pull them and pick them apart. Like it could be when we get there. Here's my prediction. When we get there, it's going to take brain to a whole different level of interaction in terms of speed. Because right now, when you click, you kind of drill through. But when you're going to be able to touch and kind of like expand things, kind of like what iPhone did with the touchscreen and the pinch for Zoom. I mean, that was such a huge quantum leap for people and so natural that I believe that when we're going to get that fidelity of resolution and fidelity of feedback, of haptic feedback, meaning touching something in virtual space and feeling it, it's going to just it will just speed up like the interaction, because you're going to be quickly able to like wade through your thoughts, literally just like push this apart, grab this, move it over here, expand it, connect it to this. It was going to become like so natural.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think, to some extent you can already kind of see that coming. The brain on the tablet, iPad in particular, is pretty compelling. Being able to actually touch your thoughts and move them around is like, it's so much more direct than a mouse, even though you think you're so good with the mouse and so natural. It's really nothing compared to being able to actually physically touch the objects.
Move it, toss it over here. It gives you that tactile element, and just kind of the interaction is really not as linear, because you can zoom in and then move something. It's like it just takes it, and that's just a simple touchscreen, I guess we could say, but like in 3D and in haptic feedback when you can feel these things, and objects, literally different thoughts could have different feel as you're touching them. So like even without looking at something, you could literally, make a discernment of like, oh, this is this type of thought, and
Sure.
yeah. Oh goodness.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of exciting possibilities. I mean, I always thought I used to make video games for a very brief period. The animation engine in the brain is actually from a video game animation thing that I created, but not anymore, but the first version was. But I used to go to E3, and one of the first things that I saw at E3 that really kind of got me excited was the haptic feedback demonstrations that they had.
Mm-hmm.
They'd have these joysticks that you could grab,
Right.
and you could move the joystick, and as you moved it around, like you could feel what surface you were on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And you could go over a button and feel the button, and like,
Yeah.
I was like, oh man, this is so awesome! I can't wait
Yeah.
for this to happen. Of course, here we are, 20 years later, still hasn't happened.
It still hasn't happened. I know. This is so disappointing with some of these technologies that kind of like bolted right through, and it's amazing. Back in the day, if you would talk to someone like, 25 years in the future, you're going to be able to talk to almost anyone on the planet with this tiny little thing that you're going to hold in your hand, like literally Star Trek-ish type of stuff. And in fact, there's like a lot of memes on the internet where they kind of, compare like how Star Trek really predicted all the stuff that's the tablets, the communicators, all that stuff. And here we are. And yet VR is like this thing that's, been around in movies, the Lawnmower Man, all that stuff. And here we are. And it's still kind of like, it's still more of a novelty than a mainstream thing. No.
It's
disappointing.
It's frustrating, but
so tell me,
all the things we have are great.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Well, I can't thank you enough for doing this and chatting with me. I'm very excited about sharing this with everybody so they can kind of I'm going to do a little plug over here for a good buddy of mine, David Friedman, who actually introduced me to TheBrain. He back in the day when it was on Tech TV, was like, you got to watch this episode. This is going to be so amazing. This cool tool is just, just a whole different thing. So he introduced me originally to TheBrain, and I've been just amazed by how you guys are developing it. I can't let you go without give me a little bit of a secret. I know you can't share like what's going to happen in version 12 and 13 and 14. Are we on 11? We're on 11 right now, right?
We're on 11, yes.
We're on 11. But without upsetting anyone, could you share something that, that you think that may or may not be in version 12?
Version 12 is going to build on what we did in version 11, right? One of the things that's been kind of on my list of things to do since I first started working on TheBrain 20-something years ago was to create a notes editor, a rich text editor with images and all that stuff, right?
Right.
And I always thought, I'll just do that, right? But as it turns out, that's not that easy to do. So for the last 20 years, up until version 11, we used notes editors from other providers.
Right.
When we started with TheBrain 1.0, all the way up until version 3, we used Microsoft's rich text editor. And then we went into the Java era, and there was a Java text editor that we used. And then we went into TheBrain 9, which had an editor that was built on top of a web browser, right? And the dirty little secret is that almost every editor that you see these days that's not from Microsoft is a web browser. And we thought, okay, that'll work just fine, right? But we were totally wrong. Version 9 and version 10 had the web browser-based editor. And it was better than version 8, but it still had like a ton of problems. So we bit the bullet finally, and we wrote our own editor from scratch, which appeared in version 11. And that really was kind of the minimum viable product, if you will. The version of the editor that's in version 11 was like, okay, we just got to get this done and replace what we have, and then like we'll have the whole road ahead of us, right? So in version 12, you're going to see kind of the first part of the fruits of that labor, I guess, kind of beyond the basics in an editor. I'm excited about
it. One of the things that, as I was kind of tracking the development and progress of TheBrain over versions, over and over, kind of improving things. And like you said, you had a era where you kind of switched to like Java, and then it was like, you refactored, re-optimized code, and I think it was like C++ or C, like you switched from Java to
C
Sharp, yeah. And so with that, the benefits of like things being faster, and of course we also have to let viewers know that TheBrain, although it originated in sort of like a standalone form where you had everything just on one computer, and then the era of cloud computing came in where you can kind of like put things out there and then connect to things. So WebBrain was developed, which you can kind of access from any browser, and then you have the team brain when you have multiple people that have access to this brain, and it can modify things and see in real time, kind of that knowledge sharing stuff. So there's a lot of, even though on the underpinning of way the brain works, how the nodes, the thoughts, the links hasn't changed. Yes, there's additional features that were added, the thought types and and tags and things like that. There's been a tremendous amount of improvement and change that's kind of going under the hood, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. If I had known how hard this is going to be when I started, I would have started. If somebody were to try and do what we're doing now, starting today, the barriers to entry are just so much bigger, because now you have to have a version for Mac, a version for Windows, a version for iOS, a version for Android, a web version, a cloud version. Like it's ridiculous, kind of how much you have to do. And if you want to do it well, you have to do a lot of it yourself, right? There are kind of indie developers that will release little pieces of productivity software or whatnot that it syncs and it works on all different operating systems and all the things that I just said. But the way they do it is they just build a web version, and then they have that web version run on all these different platforms. Right. And then it syncs because it's only in the cloud, right? Or it syncs and it's using, Apple's, I can't remember what they call it, iCloud or whatever. Mm-hmm. And you can't get it on Windows and you can't get it on Android. And there's all these like kind of gotchas, right? Right. But overcoming all of those has been a lot of work.
If you could step into a time machine and go back and see yourself at the inception of TheBrain, or maybe a couple of years in, what would you tell yourself?
Oh boy, there's too many things to list, I think. The number one thing I would say, I don't know.
It's gonna get easier.
Oh.
I promise.
I know what I would tell them. I would tell myself not to bring in large external investors.
Ooh, interesting.
That's what I would say. Yeah.
Okay.
It was great. Well, we thought it was going to be great when it happened. There were aspects of it that were nice, I guess, but overall it led to, one of the most difficult periods in my life, just like the struggle of trying to meet expectations that are just like impossible to meet,
unrealistic,
and dealing with people that they didn't really understand what it was that they were investing in, and and at the time we raised the money, it was all about kind of the .com bubble and growing as fast as you can and spending lots of money and all these things, right? So that was quite painful. So I would avoid that if I could.
An excellent tip. I very much relate to that. Back in the .com era, when me and my buddies, we were in New York, and we had this idea, which actually what became right now is QR code. Now, two-dimensional barcode. Back in the day, before this is year 2000, I believe, 1999 or 2000, where we were pitching this to the investors, and we had $1 million funding, and we were telling them that soon there will be cameras in the phones, and they could not, for all the affluence and for all the, brains that they had, they could not wrap their brains into the fact that there will be, why would you want to put a camera in a phone? That's just stupid. It's just not going to work. It's going to be crappy quality. It's not going to be any of that. And so quite frankly, we were ahead of our time, because it took, until like iPhone, where the camera quality was good enough to kind of scan these 2D barcodes but we were ahead of the time. And so I had some of that experience where we had investors who can drop $1 million and they're like, we want 51% of the company, and then suddenly the ship that you were steering in the direction that you thought was your dream and vision kind of like whoop, and it just goes somewhere else. So I'm sensing that.
Yeah, no, we had a similar experience. I mean, the whole process was painful. We thought it was the right thing to do at the time, but I mean, looking back on it now, it's like, it's not really their fault. Yeah. It's not really our fault either, but it was just not meant to be. And in the end, it turned out okay, because, we managed to kind of buy the company back from all our former investors, and the management now owns 100% of the company. So it's a great happy ending, but it was not fun.
Well, Harlan, thank you for your time. I really appreciate you doing this and sharing everything that you did. This is kind of like your shout out time for you to just kind of leave us with a shout out to whoever you want, and maybe call to action and how people can find out more about you and kind of track what you guys are doing and get excited about this wonderful software that you built.
Okay, cool. Well, I mean, thank you so much, Adrian, for inviting me on here. And, it's been great talking to you. We're always interested in talking to people who have been, using the brain and hearing about how they've used it. And, if you want to check it out, you can go to TheBrain.com and see what it's all about. It is a totally different way of looking at how you organize your information, and hopefully it'll work for you.
Well, thanks again. Really appreciate it. I kind of pride myself at being open to everything and attached to nothing, and that's how when I invite guests, I am open to what their perspectives and their way of thinking. And surely, if I would have a short list of things that changed how my life kind of developed, the brain would be one of those applications, those things in my life, which kind of shaped how I develop things. There was a number of things that I used the brain for in my life, to develop, to brainstorm, to kind of connect these thoughts. And so I thank you for building it. I thank you for conceptualizing it and bringing it into reality. And thank you again for being on the show.
Thanks for saying that. I mean, I always appreciate hearing that. The way our users love the software is really like one of the prime motivators for me and all of our staff. So thanks again.
All right. Well, here you have it, folks. Thank you for watching this show. Harlan Hugh, the founder of TheBrain.com, I can't even call it mind mapping software. You just have to check it out. So go to TheBrain.com, TheBrain.com, and check it out. Give it some time and explore it and play with it. I think they have demo free versions that you can play with, and it will change how you think, literally, no pun intended, and how you construct things, how you connect the data. We're living in this world of overwhelmingly huge amounts of data that saturate us every single day. And the brain, I think, is one of the ways that we can kind of bring some sanity to this and kind of build our own little virtual cyber brains that we can kind of use to offload some of that stuff that's in our biological brain. So again, thank you for being over here on the show, watching this. If this brought some value to you, share it with others. Find us on the web at apodcast.com. in our YouTube channel as well. Subscribe, share some thoughts, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to a podcast with interesting people. Please subscribe and leave a review or comment.
And support us by sharing our episodes on social media. We really appreciate it. And for more information, visit us at apodcast.com. Thanks.